I want to read for you a familiar passage in Mark. Of course, it's recounted in Matthew and Luke also. But this is the Last Supper, and I'm only going to take a portion of this passage because we don't have a whole lot of time to deal with everything. Otherwise, we'll be here for a marathon. Mark recounts for us the upper room Passover meal that Jesus celebrates with his disciples just before he was crucified. Beginning with verse 17. When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. This is to the upper room. While they were reclining at the table, eating, he said, "I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They were saddened, and one by one they asked or said to him, "Surely not I." "It is one of the 12, he replied, "one who dips his bread into the bowl with me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to the man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." While they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take it, this is my body." Then he took the cup, gave thanks, and offered it to them, and they all drank from it. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," he said to them. "I tell you the truth, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it anew in the kingdom of God." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Now, when we think about the Last Supper and when we have communion and remind ourselves what happened then, we don't think about the passage as it was really intended. The Last Supper, of course, is the last meal that Jesus has before he gets crucified, but that doesn't mean that he didn't eat after he was resurrected. The Last Supper just means that he ate with his disciples finally before he died. And it was the last carnal meal that he had, meaning that when he was resurrected, he had a resurrected body, and so eating for him was certainly different. But think about it this way. When somebody is on death row and he's about to be executed, the humane thing that the government does is gives him a menu and says, "Order what you want and we'll get it for you. This is your last meal before you die." And that's exactly what this was. He was going to eat with his disciples before he faced the electric chair. So let's elevate this to the degree and to the magnitude that it deserves, and think of this as the last meal that he would eat before he is executed. So everything in this passage is supposed to signify death. When he speaks, he's speaking about his death, and it's all about the pain and the anguish that he would go through. So, with that backdrop, we're supposed to understand this passage. Now, it began in the Old Testament with food being prepared to be eaten in haste during the Passover. And as you recall, the Passover was an illustration that God used and the procedure that he used in order to demonstrate what was going to happen with the firstborn of each of the Egyptians. they were going to lose them. And the whole process was, we're going to survive and be released from slavery because God's going to kill all the firstborn of Egypt, and it's going to be so sad that Pharaoh is going to release us, and the people are going to send us away happily, so to speak, and with all of the generosity that we can draw from them. And what I mean by that is, God says they will be favorably disposed towards you. So ask for stuff like gold, earrings, silver, stuff that you can take, animals that you can take to the desert in order to sacrifice to me. So the people lost their firstborn, and they just ushered them out, said, here, take this and go. And Pharaoh said, go. He was depressed. The bread was made without yeast because the Israelites had to go in a hurry and they didn't have time to let it rise. So that's why they have the flat bread instead of the puffy ones. They didn't put yeast in it, because they weren't going to use it anyway. They weren't going to give it time to rise, so they took all that out. So they ate in haste. They put their cloaks around them, tucked it under, signifying that they were in a hurry. They ate with their staff because it was going to be a long journey, and they had to take their staff with them, especially the elderly. And with their shoes on in the house, which we Asians never do. They had to eat with their shoes on. Okay. So the sacrificial lamb was roasted with bitter herbs, and if you've ever seen a Jewish minister, rabbi do a Passover Seder, the bitter herbs and everything else is an illustration. It's amazing. And he says, I'm reminding you that the slavery was bitter, and that's why you have to eat bitter herbs with the lamb. And finally, they were liberated. They were liberated from their physical enslavement, and they get to worship their God in the new place which they were looking forward to. And all of these becomes one illustration after another in Christianity, in the New Testament, where we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth. We have been liberated from our sin. We get to worship God however He wants us to. And we look at the past and say, this is what happened. We are grateful now, and we are looking forward to the future. The Last Supper that Jesus was taking was illustrated in the Old Testament Passover, and now is just beginning to be fulfilled as a reality spiritually in the illustration that Jesus is using just before He died. He takes the bread, the unleavened bread, and tells the disciples that it's His body. He takes the wine and declares it to be His blood, and that both are needed in order to release us from the enslavement of sin. Jesus is about to die as the sacrificial lamb for the forgiveness of humanity's sin. All right, let's get into this. The entire meal is a highlight of death. The Lord's death. And Paul writes that in 1 Corinthians, as he says, just before he died. The emphasis is being made that when we take the communion, the bread and the wine, we are signifying His death. We eat the bread because the bread signifies His body. We drink the cup because it signifies His blood. And then Paul adds, until he returns, which is the same way that Jesus presented it, until I join you again, as he says, I will not, and this is verse 25, I tell you the truth, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it anew in the kingdom of God. So the anticipation of the resurrection is already there. He's talking about the past, the present, and the future. And so when Paul emphasizes that in 1 Corinthians 11, he says, we do this until he comes, just as Jesus told us about it. Now, if Jesus is going to die, how can he say it with such gratitude? If Jesus is going to die, how can he say it with such gratitude? Both times, he gives thanks for the bread and for the cup. Let's look at the text. While they were eating, Jesus says in verse 22, he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to his disciples. Take it, this is my body. Then he took the cup, gave thanks again, and offered it to them, and they all drank from it. And then he said, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for you. So, both times, he is thanking God for his body to be poured and his blood to be spilled. When we normally pray for a meal, we give thanks once in the beginning, right? We pray in the beginning, we eat, we're done, we leave. We don't say anything after that. We don't say anything in between. We just have great fellowship, we eat, and we leave. But Jesus was emphasizing two aspects of his death. One is that he will be beaten to a pulp, and that his blood will be spilled, signifying that he is dead. When the soldier took his lance and stabbed Jesus in the heart, and when blood and water poured out, it was conclusive that he was dead. Remember, blood and water, they don't separate until you die. Because of the iron and all the minerals in the blood, it sinks to the bottom. So if we took your blood, it'll be just like some bottle of juice. Eventually, what's going to happen is going to separate. All the red will be on the bottom, and the water will be floating on the top. Iron sinks. So that's what happened when he stabbed him, and water and blood flowed out. He was completely dead. And the soldiers and the people who witnessed it declared it to be true. So he gave himself totally to death by spilling his blood, and yet he could be grateful for that. He can anticipate that it was going to happen and still be grateful. I thank you that my body will be ripped to pieces, and I won't even be recognizable by my parents, or my siblings, or my disciples. It says his face was marred beyond recognition. So if somebody came and looked, and they knew Jesus, backwards and forwards, and looked at the face, they wouldn't have been able to recognize, yes, that's Jesus. Now just imagine that. If your face was all torn up, that even your family members can't recognize you, that's really torn up. It was not an encouraging evening for him. It began with an announcement that somebody is going to betray him. I mean, that's how it started. It says, while they were reclining at the table in verse 18, eating, he said, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me. One who is eating with me. I mean, think about that. The betrayer is eating with Jesus. Now, you and I and every culture understands how significant eating together is. Eating together is the second most intimate thing you can do. You know that? So, if I am going to do the second most intimate thing with this individual, and he is going to betray me, that is the ultimate of betrayal. He is eating with me. He is fellowshipping with me. If somebody sins, in terms of church discipline, Paul says especially don't eat with them. Because that signifies acceptance and fellowship. And if a Christian says, oh, I'm a believer, I walk with the Lord, and he sins, he has an adulterous relationship, or he is a drunkard, or any other things that is prohibited, Paul says don't especially eat with them. Because that's just like condoning. You're committing the crime with the person. So this intimate thing that this individual is doing with Jesus, he says, one who is eating with me. This is how tragic it is. And later on he says, he said the Son of Man. Verse 21. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to the man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born. It would be better for him if he had not been born. That's how amazingly tragic and heinous this is. You should not betray the Son of Man, and yet this man is going to do it. It's going to be so difficult for this individual. Jesus says, if you compare this, it would have been better if he had not been born. I want to say more about this, but later, much later, when we actually get to this issue of why God created everything in the first place. But here he is. He's going to be betrayed. This evening is not going to turn out well. There is the beginning, the middle, the end, and in this law of peace, where Jesus is able to take his last meal with his disciples, he's being grateful. After the supper, Jesus announces that Peter would disown him 3 times. So it's not just the middle, it's not just the meal itself. In the beginning or before, there is this announcement of betrayal. Afterwards, there's still an announcement of betrayal. So it's not a very encouraging evening for Jesus. Yet in the middle, he is still grateful. So if we summarize, it would be betrayal, deceit, it would be denial, it would be death, it would be abandonment, it would be dismay. All of that stuff in one evening, summarizing the situation right now, and yet he's grateful. To be giving thanks at this point would be impossible to really ask anyone to do. So Jesus, why don't you be grateful at this situation? You would feel like shooting somebody, burning somebody at the stake at this point. So Jesus, at this time, when he illustrates with the bread and the wine, the attitude that he demonstrates, it's elevated, it's higher than anything that we could imagine, way beyond just thanking the Father for a meal. I mean, it's just doesn't compare. This was the most meaningful and reflective time in his life. Jesus was making a statement way beyond just thank you for this meal. The tragedy of tragedies is that this innocent, righteous man, God man to be specific, is going to be tortured and killed for what? He didn't deserve any of it. Won't even make sense. So let's say we didn't know the future, let's say we didn't understand, and we just sat there and looked at it, looked at the situation like the public did. They just, watched them get crucified. The soldiers watched them. All the people saw that. Even those accusers who claimed they, know about this, or that he was a blasphemer, they were all liars. So even those individuals watching this individual die on the cross knew that he didn't deserve it. They all knew that. So it wouldn't have made any sense for them. Man, this is a shame. It's not like God didn't give them a conscience and they didn't realize what was going on, even though they were evil. They knew the truth. So this moment in history was the calm before the greatest storm of history, the crucifixion of Jesus. So for the Lord, who knew that imminent pain was going to overwhelm him, who knew that it was going to be the hardest thing that he's ever done in the history of deity, demonstrated by when he was in the garden sweating drops of blood, as is described, because of his anguish. I mean, for him, just before that, to be grateful is just confusing. Doesn't make any sense. Not only did he give thanks, the end, in verse 26, says they sang a hymn. They worshipped. Do you think that was led by the disciples? Oh, Jesus, let's worship. Let's sing a hymn. Do you think they initiated that? No. Jesus initiated that. He knew he was going to die, but he was going to worship anyway. How does this kind of stuff happen? And how was Jesus able to be so grateful in a time like this? Remember, Jesus was tested when he was the hungriest. The devil came at the end of his fast. Yeah, he was there in the beginning. Yeah, he was in the middle. But especially in the end. I mean, one after another firing arrows at him. One after another. He said, you should do this. No. You should do this. No. Worship me. No. The most extreme circumstance, he was able to be grateful. How did Jesus do it? What was his Now, when you and I think about being grateful about anything, whatever it is, most of the time we're not grateful because it doesn't make any sense. We don't say thank you immediately because if we don't understand it, we're not gonna contribute to it. We're not going to follow it. We're not going to indulge. See, because if it made sense, you would be more grateful. If you can analyze it and reason it out, then you will be more grateful. Well, Jesus had it all planned out. He already knew the end from the beginning. And because he knew the end from the beginning, and he understood, he could be grateful. It wasn't like he was going into this mindlessly. He already explained to them that when he dies, this is what's going to happen. The Son of Man is going to be crucified. And on the third day, he's raised again. And what's he going to do? He's going to provide forgiveness of sin for you many, it says. It says, verse 24, this is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Poured out for many. All of these people are going to hear about it, hear the message, receive the message, and become my brothers and sisters. When we go to John, there's more of that. But what we do understand is what Jesus understood. He knew the purpose of the pain. And that's where we have to focus on. The purpose of the pain. So, how was Jesus able to be grateful in the moment of extreme circumstance? He knew the will of God. He knew the will of God, and it was the Father's plan to sacrifice him. He was slain before the foundation of the world, it says in Revelation. Even in Hebrews, he says, therefore, when Christ came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me. What was he saying? The Father prepared a body for the Son, so that the Son could be sacrificed for our sins. With burnt offerings and sin offerings you are not pleased. As in the Old Testament, those were only pictures of what was supposed to happen ultimately. It was supposed to make us drool. It was supposed to give us anticipation of what was ahead. He was never satisfied with those. I mean, how could a sacrifice satisfy God? Can't. With burnt offerings and sin offerings you were not pleased. Then I said, here I am, it is written about me in the scroll. I have come to do your will, my God. How was he able to be grateful in the midst of the extreme circumstance? He knew the will of God. He knew the will of God. It was God's idea. And any idea of God's is a good idea. And so he can submit himself to God's idea, his purpose, his plan, and be grateful. In Hebrews it says, for the joy set before him, lay down his life. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. Jesus endured the cross for the joy set before him. What was the joy? Primarily brothers and sisters?